Greeting to all YouTube and Facebook viewers. I am Vansworth Mackenzie. I have decided to bring out this video about the name Kemeth and Africa that I've heard so many historians on YouTube say that Kemeth was the name of the land of Mizraim that became known as Egypt by the Greek conquest from the power of the Persians, who was the ruler of the land of Mizraim before the Greek conquest. I want to point out to many Amite people who listen to these historian teaching that after the flood of Noah, the land was named after each of the sons of Noah and their descendants who had settled on earth landmass, such as the people of Shem, that is now known as the Asiatic people of the East, and the people of Ham, who had settled in what Psalm 78 and verse 51 called as the tabernacle of Ham, speaking of what is now called as Egypt, and what these historians call as the land of Kemeth. Also, Psalm 106 and verse 22, where the verse mentioned that the Lord Yahweh did wondrous works in the land of Ham, that is now known as Africa and Egypt, when he did all the various miracles for the children of Israel, in taking them from out of the land of Ham or Mizraim, that was later named after his second son, who was known as Mizraim. Yahweh parted the Red Sea and let the children of Israel walk through the Red Sea and dry land to go and take over the land of Canaan that Yahweh did give to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the seed of Jacob that became known as the children of Israel, after Jacob's name was changed to Israel by an angel of Yahweh. According to Genesis chapter 49, Jacob died in the land of Mizraim and was buried in Canaan of the tribe of the Hittites, people of Canaan of Ephraim. I want to say to the people of Ham who might watch my videos, and to many who listen to the teaching of many of these historians on YouTube, of their philosophy about the land they call as Kemet and the land era that became known as Africa. These men is not Yahweh who knoweth all things, and who has given the scripture to be a light of true knowledge of true history, that bear record of all the human family and the land of Ham that the scripture spoke of as the land of Ham and his descendants that became known as North Africa, speaking of the land of Mizraim that became known as Egypt, where Ham himself was living. Some of these historians I have listened to on YouTube mention that the name Africa came from Publius Cornelius Scipio when he was able to defeat the Carthaginian army of Hannibal in the Third Punic War at Zama in the northern part of the land of Ham. That became known as North Africa, which is a totally false statement. Other historians I've listened to on YouTube explain that the name Africa was the original name that came from the people of Mizraim, who became known as Egyptian people by the Macedonian conquest of Alexander the Great, from the rulership of the power of the Persian, who was the ruler over the land of Mizraim before the conquest of Alexander the Great and his general of Macedonia, who defeated the Persian and take over rulership of the land of Mizraim. I would like to point out that the name of the land of Ham go way back over 7,000 years before the children of Israel became a nation of people in the land of Canaan that is now known as Israel. Also, before the scripture was given to the ancient children of Israel at Mount Sinai, in comparison to the name Kemeth and what became known as North Africa by the defeat of the Roman army over Carthage in 264-241 BC in the First Punic War between the Roman and the army of Carthage of what became known as North Africa. When reading from volume 13 of the encyclopedia, David mentioned that the name Africa meant to the Roman a land that is sunny, without winter and cold weather like that of Europe. The name Africa later became known as Africa in the Anglo-Saxon dialect that became known as the English language of today. This name Africa that became known as Africa was hundreds of years before Publius Cornelius Scipio was able to defeat the Carthaginian army of Hannibal at Zama in the Third Punic War in the northern part of the land of Ham, with his combined force of Prince Massinia of what became known as Morocco and Algeria of today, in which Scipio named himself Africanus Scipio to glorify his victory over the land of Carthage, who was a powerful power source during Greek, Etruscan, and Roman time, that finally brought the destruction of the land of Carthage. I would like to point out that before the name Africa and Kemeth came about, people were named after the name of their fathers and from what tribe or country they came from. So I do not know where these historians get the name Kemeth from, that they teach many Hamite people and YouTube as the original name of the land that became known as Egypt. I would like to mention to many Hamite viewers who might watch my video that I did check the encyclopedia and also online to see if I could come up with some information of where the name Kemeth originated from. And I could not find any trace where the name Kemeth came from. One could check the scripture book of Psalms chapter 78 and verse 51, and also Psalms chapter 106 and verse 22. There one would see that the verse speak of the land of Ham that is now known as the land of Egypt and what became known as North Africa. Anyone could also check volume 13 of the Encyclopedia Britannica, and there one would see that the name Africa that became known as Africa came from the Romans when they were able to defeat the Carthaginian army in the First Punic War of 264-241 BC and set up a base in the northern part of the land of Ham that they named as Tunis, that became known as the country of Tunisia of today. I would like to point out that when reading from volume 20 of the Encyclopedia Britannica, there clearly explained that the power structure of the Mediterranean era and what became known as North Africa was controlled by Carthage, and they and the Greek and the Etruscan had control over the Mediterranean era before Rome came up and destroyed the Etruscan, Carthage, and also Greece, and take many Greek people as slaves. It is also mentioned in volume 20 of the Encyclopedia that when the Romans defeated Greece, as it was so prophesied in the book of Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7, many Greeks were sold from the slave market of the island of Darious in Greece to Rome and many parts of the Mediterranean as slaves. Sad to say that many of the people of today can be easily misled and deceived by many of these historians to believe this or that because they do not have any knowledge of who they are and where they're coming from as a people. Before slavery and colonialism by the people of Europe and also by the Ishmaelite, Mohammedan, Muslim people who became known as the Saudi Arabian people of today. Many of these conquerors were rulers of what became known as North Africa and the so-called Middle East, that they have taught many people who came under their slavery system to see things their way. So this name Kemeth I have heard many historians mention on YouTube to be associated with the land of Mizraim, it is a false make-up name that became known as Egypt. As I have mentioned, that one can check the name of the land of Am that became known as Egypt from the scripture that go back thousands of years before the name Africa came about. I have written about these things to benefit many Amite people who look up to these historians on YouTube, to give them some kind of direction about the land of their ancestors that became known as Africa, where they and their ancestors are coming from. I also want to mention to many Amite people of the United States who see themselves as the African American people that came from the Roman name Africa. I also want to point out to many Amite people of the United States that the name America, that they see themselves as a part of this racial identity, was taken from the name of Americus Vespucci, who was a man from the land era that became known as Italy of Florence, who went to work for the Spanish after the death of Columbus, who was also working for the Spanish, and who died in Spain homeless, according to History of the West Indian People, Book 2. It was a German writer who made the statement in his book that they should name the land of the New World after the name of Americus Vespucci, because he traveled further south in the New World and discovered more land than Columbus, who only went to what he named as the West Indies, because he thought he was west of the land of Bharat that became known as India, where he had it in his mindset to go. So many of my people of the United States who see themselves as Afro-American people are only deceiving themselves by holding on to these false names and false identity that were given to them during the slavery days. As a racial people of what became known as the United States of America. Also the name black people and African people that I have heard so many Amite historians on YouTube like to see themselves as such. That is associated with the name Africa and the name black people that was taken from the Latin name Niger that came down into the Spanish as Negroes, that meant to the Roman as dark-skinned people. I would also like to say that the British with other European people have taken many dark-skinned people from Asia and what became known as India as slaves. Yet they did not name these dark-skinned people of Asia as Negroes and black people, but they only named them as Indian and Asian people, to fool the crowd and to deceive them and to let them think that they're a different entity because or see themselves as a superior people to us, because the world were only taught that we as the so-called black people and African people were taken as a slave to serve these European people in their colonies and also in Europe, which is a total false information and deception. I must say, they don't bother to mention anything about the native slave of what became known as Americans and the West Indies, who were taken as slave, or who was the first slave to serve these European people in their conquered colony of what became known as the Americas and the West Indies. The people of what became known as the United States of America have embraced these false names that were given to us as a people to see ourselves as such. My question to these Hamite people of the United States who see themselves as the Afro-American people, are they a part of the family of Americus Vespucci, where the name America came from? Because from the beginning of the creation of the human family, the people were named after their fathers they came from, because of Yahweh, who is the father of creation. That eventually became known as the family of Yahweh because he is the father of all the people of the earth. Then my people of the United States have embraced this false identity as the black people of the United States. This is the reason why they have invented the celebration of Black History Month that is held in the month of February as a part of their racial identity for them to see themselves as such, because they do not know any better. So the meaning of this Black History Month that I've gotten is to let these people to believe that their civilization was started in the various slavery colonies of the people of Europe, where their ancestors were taken and brought them forth. Even many educated Amite people of the United States cannot break away from this slavery identity that was given to them to embrace. That in turn they call each other as niggers, that was taken from the Latin word Niger. This just goes to show that it is not easy to break away from the slavery mentality teaching that were given to us as a people to go by as our racial identity. This is my reason why I have put so much effort to bring out to light many of my various videos to give enlightenment to the minds of many Amite people who might watch my videos so as to come to a better knowledge of who they are and where we as a people are coming from, so as to counteract all the false identities that were given to us during the slavery colonial days to see ourselves as such. I want to point out to the people of Am that if they continue to see themselves by these slavery colonial names, they will never come to truth of who they are and where they're coming from as a people. And their children will follow them in darkness and ignorance, because education starts at home first, of knowing who you are and where you're coming from. So true identity is a part of education from following these slavery teaching that was given to us to go by. I also want to point out that the Macedonian rulership over the land of Am and Canaan before the time of the Roman came up and take over rulership from the Macedonian Empire of Alexander the Great and his general, have also caused a brain drain for many Amite people not to know who they are and where they're coming from. I was watching a documentary discussion on YouTube about the land of Mizraim that many Hamite historians of today call as Kemeth. One of these Hamite historians was asked the question if Cleopatra, who had ruled as queen of the land of Mizraim, was a black woman. This Hamite historian answered and said, yes, she was a black woman. I want to set the record straight by saying that Cleopatra, who did rule as queen over the land of Mizraim, was a descendant of Ptolemy, who was one of the generals of Alexander the Great of the country of Macedonia of Europe, who Alexander made governor over the land of Mizraim after the defeat of the army of Darious of Persia, and take over Mizraim all the way to Persia and the land of Barat that became known as India by the Greek conquest, and also that of the Roman, who defeated the Greeks and take over all the Greek colonies. So Cleopatra was from the descendant of Ptolemy, Sultan, who made himself king of the land of Mizraim and other places of the era after the death of Alexander the Great at age 32, and who also saw himself as a god to the people of Mizraim. So the dynasty of Ptolemy Sultan continued down to the time of the Romans, of Cleopatra, Julius Caesar, and Mark Antony. So Cleopatra was a European woman ruling as queen over the land of Mizraim that gave her the title as Queen of the Nile. The same is true for many European people who are ruling over the land that became known as South Africa and other places in the land of Ham, who see themselves as native of the land of Ham, but who are from the country of Europe, of the people of Japheth. I would like to point out to the people of Ham that when reading from volume 20 of the encyclopedia, the impression I've gotten is that the Greek people of Sparta, Athens, Corinth, with other Greek cities of the Greek Turkey era of Europe, did not consider the Macedonian people of Europe to be a part of the Greek family of Europe, but who they had considered to be a part of the barbarian people of Europe. Although Philip II of Macedonia, who was the father of Alexander the Great, did conquer all Greece before his assassination and death, that did become a part of the Macedonian Empire of Philip II. I also want to point out to the people of Ham who may watch my videos that when the Romans conquered Macedonia, they divided the country into 4 different regions that became known today as Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Yugoslavia, into 4 different tax-paying kingdoms. When reading from volume 20 of the encyclopedia and also looking at the World Atlas showing these places that I've mentioned, I want to point out to the people of Ham who listen to many of these historians on YouTube who came up with these names for the land of Ham as a part of our racial identity that many of us hold on to as truth because we know no better. Sad to say that the people of Ham has been going along with these false history and false name because of lack of knowledge and total darkness of our true history, where we and our ancestors are coming from before slavery and colonialism by the people of Europe and by the Ishmaelite Mohammedan Muslim people of what became known as the Saudi Arabian people of today. As I've mentioned in one of my videos, that according to the Webster Collegiate Dictionary, the name Arabian people came from Greek, Latin, and French for the Ishmaelite people of what is now known as the Saudi Arabian and Arab people, with their many conquered people, to the worship of their god Allah, many of whom were the rulers of what became known as the Middle East and North Africa, many of whom has a lot of the European man blood running through their veins, from the Greek, the Roman, Turks, with other European conquerors and settlers who came up from out of the breakup of the Roman Empire and melt out many of these Ishmaelite people into their melting pot of different shade of people one see today in the so-called Middle East and what became known as North Africa. Thank you, YouTube, for giving me this opportunity to elaborate about this very important history, to bring light and knowledge to many Hamite people's minds who are sleeping, dreaming, and have no knowledge of these facts, but only go by the many false teaching and doctrine that came up from the Europeans, the Mohammedans, to many so-called false historians who think they know all these things and condemn the scripture that all our life and hope and destiny is based upon. But again, give thanks to Yahweh and give praises to Him, to Yeshua Lord, for giving me this enlightenment that I could pass it on to many Hamite people minds. And I hope that they may wake up and become smart people and move away from this colonial slavery thinking. Thank you. Take care.